My name is Jace Sollace, and until 3 weeks ago I thought I was living an ordinary life. Turns out ordinary was just the costume I wore while my wife performed her magic show behind the curtain. I install security systems for a living: cameras, alarms, motion detectors. The irony wasn't lost on me when I discovered the biggest security breach was happening in my own home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It started on a Tuesday night in October. I was in the garage, organizing my tools after a long day of wiring up some rich guy's mansion in the suburbs. The kind of house where they have more bathrooms than I have rooms. Ember, my wife of 8 years, was inside making dinner and talking on the phone. Nothing unusual there. Ember worked in public relations and spent half her life on calls, managing some crisis or another for her clients. I could hear her voice through the thin wall between the garage and kitchen, but I wasn't really listening. After 8 years of marriage, you learn to tune out the background noise. She was laughing at something, that bright musical laugh that made me fall in love with her back in college. The same laugh that used to be just for me. "He's just so dull," she said, and her voice carried that particular tone she used when she thought no one important was listening. I mean, I love him, but God, sometimes I feel like I married down, you know? The wrench in my hand suddenly felt heavier. I set it down carefully on the workbench, my movements deliberate and quiet. Through the wall, Ember's conversation continued. "No, he has no idea. How could he? He comes home, watches his shows, fixes things around the house. He's like a golden retriever, loyal, predictable, and completely oblivious to anything beyond his immediate needs." I pressed my ear closer to the wall. The smart thing would have been to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But intelligence and wisdom are different animals, and mine were apparently having a territorial dispute. "Of course I think about it," Ember continued. "You know I do. But the timing has to be right. Your situation needs to resolve first, and then we can figure out our next steps." Our next steps. Interesting pronoun choice. "I know, baby. I know. Just a little longer, and then we won't have to hide anymore." Baby. She called someone baby, not me. I was Jace, honey, or when she was feeling particularly affectionate, my security guy. Never baby. That was apparently reserved for someone whose situation needed resolving. I stayed in the garage until I heard her footsteps heading upstairs. When I finally came inside, she was setting the table with her usual efficiency, humming something under her breath. She looked up when I entered, and her smile was warm and genuine. "How was your day?" she asked, the same question she'd been asking for 8 years. "Fine," I said, which was the same answer I'd been giving for just as long. But tonight, the word felt different in my mouth. Tonight, it tasted like a lie. The next morning, Ember left for work before I did. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her lips soft against my cheek, and told me she'd be late getting home. Client dinner. I nodded and waved from the window as she backed out of the driveway in her silver Honda. 20 minutes later, I was supposed to be heading to a job site in the industrial district. Instead, I found myself sitting in my kitchen, staring at Ember's iPad on the counter. She'd forgotten it, which wasn't unusual. Ember was always forgetting things, always rushing from one appointment to another. The device was synced to her phone. I knew this because I'd set it up for her 2 years ago when she complained about having to type long emails on her tiny phone screen. At the time, it seemed like a thoughtful gesture. Now, it felt like providence. The notification popped up while I was still debating whether to look. A text message preview, just enough to see the sender and the first few words. "Baby, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about..." The preview cut off there, but I'd seen enough. My hands were surprisingly steady as I opened the Messages app. Maybe shock has its own anesthetic properties. The conversation thread was labeled "baby" with a heart emoji. Cute. I scrolled to the top, to the beginning of their digital relationship, and started reading. 18 months of messages. 18 months of my wife living a completely different life than the one I thought we shared. The early messages were flirtatious, but relatively innocent. Compliments about her appearance, inside jokes, references to shared memories from before I was in the picture. Then they escalated. Plans to meet for coffee became plans to meet for lunch, became plans to meet at the Marriott downtown every Thursday afternoon. Griffin's getting married in 6 months, one message read. His fiancée is sweet but completely clueless. I almost feel sorry for her. Griffin. I knew that name. Griffin Marrow, Ember's ex-boyfriend from college. The one she claimed to have zero contact with. The one who was apparently getting married while maintaining a very active relationship with my wife. I took screenshots of everything. All 18 months, every explicit photo, every detailed plan, every casual reference to me as the husband or Jay or, in one particularly charming exchange, my roommate. The screenshots filled my phone's storage, so I started printing them on our home printer. 247 pages of evidence that my marriage was a carefully maintained fiction. The messages revealed more than just an affair. They showed a complete alternate reality, where Ember was trapped in a loveless marriage to a boring man who couldn't satisfy her intellectually or physically, where she was counting down the days until Griffin's wedding was over so they could finally be together properly, where I was the obstacle to her happiness, too dense to realize I was being managed rather than loved. He actually thinks we're happy, she'd written just 3 weeks ago. He has no idea that I'm going through the motions. Sometimes I wonder if he'd even notice if I disappeared for a week. I printed that message twice and taped both copies to my bathroom mirror. By the time I finished documenting their relationship, it was almost noon. I called my foreman and told him I had food poisoning. Not technically a lie. Reading about your wife's affair does create a certain nausea. Then I drove to the public library and used their computer to research Griffin Marrow. He owned a restaurant downtown, one of those farm-to-table places that charged $30 for a chicken breast because it was locally sourced and organic. His social media was full of pictures of perfectly plated food and carefully staged shots of him looking thoughtful in his chef's coat. He was handsome in that polished way that successful men cultivate. Good haircut, expensive watch, confident smile. His engagement announcement was posted 6 months ago. The bride-to-be was Liora Ventral, owner of a boutique bridal shop in the Arts District. She was beautiful in a delicate way, with blonde hair and the kind of porcelain complexion that suggested she'd never worked a day in direct sunlight. Her Instagram was full of wedding planning content, venue tours, dress fittings, cake tastings. She looked genuinely happy in every photo. Poor thing thinks she's special, Ember had written about her. She has no idea what she's getting into. I stared at Liora's engagement photos for a long time. In them, Griffin looked at her the same way he looked at his perfectly plated food, like something beautiful he'd created for display. The same way he probably looked at Ember during their Thursday afternoon meetings. That evening, Ember came home with takeout from Griffin's restaurant. She'd been doing that more often lately, I realized. Bringing home his food, supporting his business with my money, while she supported him in other ways with her body. "How was your day?" she asked, unpacking containers of overpriced pasta. "Enlightening," I said. She looked up, momentarily confused by my deviation from the script, then smiled and launched into a story about a difficult client. I nodded in the right places and made appropriate sounds of sympathy while I watched her perform. Because that's what it was. A performance. Every gesture, every expression, every casual touch of my arm was choreographed to maintain the illusion that she was my wife instead of Griffin's mistress who happened to share my address. After dinner, while she was in the shower, I copied all the screenshots to a secure cloud account and encrypted the files. Then I made multiple backup copies on different devices. If I was going to war, I needed to protect my ammunition. That night, lying next to her in bed, I listened to her breathe and planned my first move. Ember thought she was married to someone predictable, someone who would never see her betrayal coming. She was half right. I was predictable. Predictably thorough, predictably methodical, and predictably determined to protect what was mine. She'd made one crucial miscalculation. She assumed that ordinary meant weak. She was about to learn the difference. I spent the next week in reconnaissance mode, gathering intelligence and planning my strategy. The beauty of installing security systems is that you learn to think like someone trying to break in. You study the vulnerabilities, map the weak points, and then you exploit them systematically. Ember's weakness was her confidence. She'd been managing me so successfully for so long that she'd stopped being careful. She left her phone unlocked around me, took calls in the next room instead of outside, forgot to delete browser histories. She was operating under the assumption that I was too trusting or too stupid to notice the obvious signs. Her second weakness was her loyalty to Griffin. The messages showed that she'd throw herself under a bus to protect him. That kind of devotion could be weaponized if you knew how to aim it properly. Griffin's weakness was his ego. His social media presence painted him as a man who cared deeply about his reputation and public image. The restaurant, the engagement, the carefully curated lifestyle, it was all performance art designed to showcase his success. Men like that don't handle public humiliation well. But Liora was the key to everything. She was innocent, genuinely in love, and completely unaware that her fiancé was using their engagement as cover for his ongoing affair. She was also, according to her Instagram, having her final dress fitting on Friday afternoon at her own bridal boutique. Perfect timing. I took a personal day on Friday and drove to the copy center across town. The teenager behind the counter didn't even blink when I asked him to print and bind 247 pages of text messages. He probably assumed it was some kind of legal document. He wasn't wrong. "You want this in a presentation folder?" he asked. "Gift wrap," I said. "Something elegant. It's for an engagement." He selected silver paper with white ribbons. Very tasteful, very appropriate for the occasion. The boutique was exactly what I'd expected. All white and gold, with mannequins in flowing gowns and enough mirrors to make you dizzy. A small bell chimed when I entered, and a woman with perfectly styled gray hair approached me with a professional smile. "Can I help you?" "I have a delivery for Liora Ventral," I said, holding up the wrapped package. "Engagement gift." "Oh, how lovely. She's in the back with her bridesmaids, doing her final fitting. I'll take it to her." Actually, the sender asked me to deliver it personally, something about wanting to see her reaction. The woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, right this way." She led me through the main showroom to a private fitting area in the back. Liora stood on a circular platform in front of a three-way mirror, wearing what I assumed was her wedding dress. It was beautiful, simple, elegant, the kind of dress that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. 3 other women sat in plush chairs around the platform, all holding champagne glasses and offering opinions about hemlines and accessories. Liora looked up when we entered, and her face lit up with curiosity. "A delivery? How exciting!" "Congratulations on your engagement," I said, handing her the package. "I hope this brings you everything you need to know about your future." She accepted the gift with a delighted laugh. "How mysterious. Who's it from?" "Someone who cares about your happiness," I said. The gray-haired woman was looking at me with growing suspicion, but Liora was already tearing at the ribbon with the enthusiasm of someone who genuinely loved surprises. I stayed long enough to see her open the cover and read the first page, long enough to see her expression change from delight to confusion to something approaching horror. Then I left. I was halfway to my truck when I heard the scream. It was the kind of sound that makes everyone in a 3-block radius stop what they're doing and look around for the source. The gray-haired woman would later describe it to the local news as something breaking inside, which was probably the most accurate description anyone could have offered. My phone started ringing before I made it home. "Ember," calling from work. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message while I sat in my driveway. Jace, something terrible has happened. Griffin's wedding has been called off. Liora found out about us somehow. I don't know how, but she knows everything. Griffin is devastated. His family is asking questions, and I think they might try to blame me for ruining everything. Can you call me back? I need to come home and figure out what to do. I saved the message, then went inside to wait. Ember arrived an hour later, looking like she'd aged 5 years since morning. Her makeup was smudged, her hair disheveled, and her hands were shaking as she fumbled with her keys. "Did you get my message?" she asked without preamble. "Yeah, that's rough." "How did she find out?" "I don't know." Ember collapsed onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. "Someone sent her printed copies of our text messages. All of them, Jace. Every single conversation we've had for the past 1.5 years. "Wow," I said. "That's pretty thorough. Any idea who would do something like that?" "It had to be someone with access to Griffin's phone, maybe one of his restaurant employees, or someone from his family who didn't approve of me. His mother never liked the fact that he was with someone else before Liora." I nodded sympathetically. "What did the messages say?" Ember looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Nothing that would matter to you, just old relationship stuff. You know how exes can be. They stay in touch sometimes, even when they shouldn't." "Right," I said. "Old relationship stuff. The thing is," she continued, "Griffin's family lost a lot of money on this wedding. The deposits, the venue, the catering. His father is talking about suing someone for damages, but he doesn't know who to blame. That's unfortunate. Jace, I need you to know that what happened between Griffin and me, it doesn't change anything between us. You're my husband. You're the one I chose to build a life with." I looked at her sitting there, still trying to manage me even in crisis, still believing she could control the narrative if she just found the right words. It was almost admirable in its audacity. "I believe you," I said. Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. I was so worried you might think, I know how this must look from the outside. Like you've been having an affair for 18 months? The color drained from her face. "What?" "That's how it looks from the outside," I said calmly. "Like you've been meeting your ex-boyfriend at the Marriott every Thursday afternoon while I was at work. Like you've been planning to leave me as soon as his wedding was over. Like you've been using our marriage as cover while you waited for him to become available." Ember's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. Finally, she managed, "How could you possibly know that? Your iPad syncs with your phone, remember? I set that up for you. Every message you sent him came through to the tablet. Every photo, every plan, every casual reference to me as your boring roommate. Jace, I can explain." "I'm sure you can. You're very good at explaining things. You explained why you needed to work late all those Thursday nights. You explained why you were suddenly interested in supporting local restaurants. You explained why you seemed so distracted lately, so eager to end conversations and check your phone." I stood up and walked to the kitchen, returning with a manila folder. "You want to know how Liora found out?" I told her. "I printed every message you sent to Griffin and delivered them to her bridal fitting this afternoon." Ember stared at the folder like it contained explosives. "You did what?" "I gave her the truth, something you apparently forgot how to do. Jace, you don't understand. It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. The only question now is what happens next." Ember's phone rang. She glanced at the screen, and I saw Griffin's name displayed. She looked at me, then at the phone, clearly torn between answering and continuing our conversation. "Go ahead," I said. "Take it. I'm sure he needs to discuss strategy with his co-conspirator." She answered the call with trembling fingers. "Griffin?" "Yes, I told him. He knows everything." I couldn't hear Griffin's side of the conversation, but I could see Ember's face growing paler with each word he spoke. "No," she said finally. "No, I won't do that." Jace is my husband, and whatever else has happened, I won't abandon him to clean up our mess." She hung up and looked at me with something that might have been genuine remorse. "He wants me to leave with him tonight, drive to his cousin's place in Colorado until this all settles down. And you said no." I said no. Why? Because despite everything, despite all the mistakes I've made, you don't deserve to be left alone to deal with the fallout. This is my responsibility too. It was a pretty speech. It might have even been sincere. But sincerity doesn't undo 18 months of betrayal, and responsibility doesn't erase the damage that's already been done. "You're right," I said. "This is your responsibility, and you're going to deal with every consequence, just like Liora is dealing with hers right now." "What do you mean?" I opened the manila folder and spread its contents across the coffee table. Bank statements, loan documents, credit reports, property records, the financial archaeology of our marriage, excavated and analyzed while she was at work. "I mean that your affair wasn't just emotional," I said. "You've been stealing from me to fund Griffin's business, forged signatures on loan applications, unauthorized use of our home equity, credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge. You mortgaged our future to pay for his." Ember looked at the documents with growing horror. "How did you get these?" "I'm very good at finding things, remember? It's what I do for a living." "Jace, I can explain all of this." "No," I said, gathering up the papers. "You can't, because there's no explanation that makes theft acceptable. There's no excuse that turns betrayal into love. And there's no story you can tell that will convince me to forgive what you've done." I stood up and walked toward the stairs. "You can stay here tonight, but tomorrow you need to find somewhere else to live. I'll be filing for divorce on Monday, and I'll be pressing charges for fraud on Tuesday." "Jace, please, we can work through this. We can go to counseling, figure out how to rebuild." "We tried counseling, remember? Dr. Corvin, except you were using those sessions to get advice on how to manage your affair instead of how to save our marriage." Ember's face went white. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because Dr. Corvin decided that protecting her license was more important than protecting your secrets. Amazing how quickly people's loyalties shift when they realize they're about to lose everything." I paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked back at her. She was sitting in the wreckage of her carefully constructed lies, surrounded by evidence of her betrayal, finally understanding that her ordinary husband had been anything but predictable. "You know what the funny thing is?" I said. "You were right about me being average. Average intelligence, average income, average ambitions. But you forgot something important about average people." "What's that?" "We're underestimated, and that makes us dangerous." The next 3 weeks were a masterclass in systematic destruction. I approached Ember's downfall the same way I approached a complex security installation, methodically, thoroughly, and with attention to every detail that could compromise the final result. The first priority was protecting my daughter, Chloe. At 6 years old, she was too young to understand the adult complexities of betrayal and revenge, but old enough to be damaged by the fallout. I documented everything that could affect custody arrangements, including Ember's financial fraud and her willingness to abandon her family for Griffin. The second priority was legal protection. I hired Rebecca Martinez, a divorce attorney with a reputation for aggressive representation and a personal distaste for cheating spouses. She reviewed my evidence with the enthusiasm of someone who'd finally found a case where the facts aligned perfectly with her moral convictions. "This is the most thoroughly documented affair I've ever seen," she said during our first meeting. "Your wife essentially created a paper trail of her own destruction. The financial fraud alone gives us enough leverage to ensure you get everything you're entitled to." "I want primary custody," I said, "and I want her held accountable for every dollar she stole." "Both achievable. The question is how public you want this to become. We can settle quietly, or we can make this a matter of public record." "Public record," Rebecca smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." The third priority was Griffin. Destroying Ember's life wasn't enough. He'd been an equal participant in the betrayal, and he needed to face equal consequences. His restaurant was the obvious target. Food service businesses live and die by reputation, and Griffin's reputation was about to become a cautionary tale. I started by creating anonymous social media accounts and posting detailed reviews of my experiences at his restaurant. Not lies. I'd actually eaten there multiple times, unknowingly funding my wife's affair with every overpriced meal. But my reviews focused on aspects of the business that couldn't be easily disproven: slow service, inconsistent food quality, unprofessional staff behavior. Then I escalated. I created a website called Griffin's Truth and posted the entire text message archive, along with documentation of the financial fraud and a timeline showing how he'd used his engagement to Liora as cover for his ongoing affair. I included photos of him and Ember entering and leaving hotels, taken during my own surveillance operations. The website went viral within 48 hours. Local food bloggers picked up the story, then the mainstream media. Griffin's restaurant started receiving negative reviews from people who'd never eaten there, but who were disgusted by his behavior. Reservation cancellations poured in. His staff quit. His suppliers demanded payment in advance. Within a week, he was forced to close temporarily. Within 2 weeks, he was forced to close permanently. But the most satisfying destruction was personal. I arranged for Ember to discover the website at the worst possible moment, during a meeting with her own attorney, when she was trying to present herself as the wronged party who deserved sympathy and financial support. "Mrs. Sollace," her lawyer said, looking at his laptop screen with confusion, "I'm getting calls from reporters who want to interview you about something called Griffin's Truth. Are you familiar with this website?" Ember's face went through several interesting color changes before settling on a pale green that matched our bathroom tiles. No. What website?" Her lawyer turned the laptop around so she could see the screen. I wasn't there, of course, but Rebecca described the scene to me later with obvious relish. Ember had apparently made a sound like a balloon deflating, then excused herself to be sick in the courthouse bathroom. "Your husband is very thorough," her lawyer told Rebecca afterward, "and very angry." "Yes," Rebecca had replied. "He is." The website was just the beginning. I'd also sent copies of the evidence to Ember's employer, along with documentation showing how she'd used company resources to facilitate her affair. She was fired within 3 days, ostensibly for misuse of company property, but actually because her boss didn't want the scandal affecting their client relationships. Griffin's family turned on him completely once they understood the scope of his deception. His father, who'd co-signed the restaurant loan, was facing financial ruin because of his son's poor business decisions and worse personal choices. His mother, who'd spent months planning and paying for a wedding that would never happen, refused to speak to him. Most importantly, Liora filed her own lawsuit against Griffin for fraud and emotional distress. She'd discovered that he'd been using money intended for their wedding to fund his affair, including paying for hotel rooms and gifts for Ember. Her attorney was seeking damages that would ensure Griffin remained financially destroyed for years to come. But the real masterpiece was the custody hearing. Ember had initially demanded 50-50 custody, claiming that despite her mistakes as a wife, she was still a devoted mother. She'd underestimated how thoroughly I'd documented her priorities. Rebecca presented the court with evidence showing that Ember had missed 17 of Chloe's school events in the past year because of her Thursday afternoon meetings with Griffin. She'd canceled doctor's appointments, skipped parent-teacher conferences, and forgotten to pick up our daughter from daycare on 3 separate occasions because she was too distracted by her affair. "Your Honor," Rebecca said, "Mrs. Sollace's own text messages show that she viewed her family as an obstacle to her happiness rather than a priority to be protected. She wrote, and I quote, 'Sometimes I wish I could just disappear and start over somewhere else, without all these responsibilities holding me back.' The judge, a woman in her 50s with grown children of her own, was not sympathetic to Ember's explanations. She awarded me primary custody, with Ember receiving supervised visitation until she could demonstrate stability and commitment to her daughter's welfare. Ember tried to appeal, but her new lawyer advised her that fighting the decision would only generate more negative publicity and legal expenses she couldn't afford. She was already facing bankruptcy because of the financial fraud judgment and her unemployment. Adding a costly custody battle would guarantee her complete ruin. 2 months after I delivered my gift to Liora, Ember was living in a studio apartment across town, working as a receptionist for a veterinary clinic, and seeing our daughter for 4 hours every Saturday afternoon under court supervision. Griffin was living in his parents' basement, unemployed and unemployable in the local restaurant industry, facing multiple lawsuits that would follow him for years. Liora had reopened her bridal boutique, with a new focus on helping women who'd discovered betrayal before their weddings. She'd turned her personal trauma into a business opportunity, offering truth verification services for suspicious brides-to-be. According to her website, she was booked solid for the next 6 months. And me? I was exactly where I'd started. Average, ordinary, predictable. Except now, everyone knew that ordinary men could be extraordinarily dangerous when properly motivated. The house was quieter now, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than the tense silence that had characterized the final months of my marriage. Chloe and I had developed new routines, new traditions, new ways of being a family that didn't require managing anyone's lies or accommodating anyone's betrayal. On Thursday afternoons, when Ember used to meet Griffin at the Marriott, Chloe and I went to the park. We fed ducks, played on the playground, and talked about her day at school. Simple, ordinary activities that meant everything because they were honest. "Daddy," she said one afternoon while we were watching the ducks, "why doesn't Mommy live with us anymore?" It was a question I'd been dreading and preparing for in equal measure. "Because sometimes adults make choices that hurt the people they love," I said. "And when that happens, families have to change shape to protect the people who matter most. Like me. Especially like you." She nodded with the matter-of-fact acceptance that children bring to difficult truths. "Will Mommy make better choices now?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I will. Every day, I'll make choices that put you first." "Good," she said, and threw another piece of bread to the ducks. That evening, after Chloe was asleep, I sat in my kitchen and looked at the space where Ember's iPad used to charge. The counter was empty now, clean and uncluttered. No devices syncing betrayals, no hidden messages, no carefully maintained lies. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "This is Liora. I wanted to thank you for what you did. It saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. I hope you're finding peace." I typed back, "Peace is overrated. Justice is better." She responded immediately, "Maybe they're the same thing." Maybe they were. I'd never thought of myself as someone who sought justice, that seemed too grand, too noble for an ordinary man with an ordinary life. But perhaps that's what I'd been pursuing all along. Not revenge, not cruelty, but simply the restoration of truth to a situation that had been built on lies. Ember had been right about one thing. I was predictable. I was the kind of man who honored his commitments, protected his family, and expected others to do the same. When those expectations were violated, I responded with the same methodical determination I brought to every other aspect of my life. The difference was that she'd mistaken predictability for weakness. She'd assumed that because I was ordinary, I was also passive. She'd forgotten that ordinary people built the world, defended it, and maintained it through countless small acts of determination and resolve. Average, it turned out, was exactly the weapon she should have feared most. Because average people don't give up, don't give in, and don't forgive betrayals that threaten the simple, ordinary things they've worked their entire lives to build. I turned off the lights and went upstairs to check on Chloe. She was sleeping peacefully, surrounded by stuffed animals and picture books, dreaming whatever dreams 6-year-olds dream when they feel safe and loved. Tomorrow was Friday. We'd have pancakes for breakfast like we did every Friday now. Then I'd drop her at school and go to work, installing security systems for people who understood that protection was worth the investment. Simple, ordinary activities that meant everything because they were honest. Average had won, and it felt exactly like justice.